everybody, and welcome to the God's Heart podcast. I'm Reverend Faulkner, your host. Cool discussion coming up today with Tim Luisi, who I'll introduce in a second. We're going to talk Christian media and specifically The Chosen, which if you have been to church or have been listening to my sermons or talked to me, I have been talking a lot about this. So I'm interested to get Tim's perspective as on this as someone who has done work as a film critic and also as someone I respect greatly in that regard. But first, last week, I talked a little bit about something that John MacArthur tweeted out. And then this week, man, it just has gotten crazier. So here's what's going on with that. And I have no other explanation for this other than maybe there's some just old age happening here. He has gone all in on his defense of Christian nationalism. He's gone all in on his defense of not defense. He's actually gone anti-religious liberty, like to the point where it's almost as if he expects that everyone should automatically bow down to Christianity and its people. And if you heard Brandon and I's discussion, you know why that's a really bad idea, why that is really just a harmful attitude to have, because you're playing into idolatry and various things leading people astray, all the different things. Go listen to last week's podcast if you didn't. But my word, this is also the guy, by the way, who is suing the state of California so his church can meet in person. So I don't know. I'm following this just because it is interesting and because I know it's being talked about in the greater sphere, but it is actually a little disturbing from a pastoral perspective. And also from a human perspective in general. I do believe in religious freedom. I think it's an important thing, but it is not a hill to die on, believe it or not. And if it is taken away, then that is the world we live in, and we have to submit, as Romans 13 tells us to. Pray for our leaders. So I don't know. All right. I'm going to bring in Tim Luisi. Tim is a doctoral student at the University of Missouri. And did I get that right?
Yeah, the University of Missouri. I know that you have mostly a Hawkeyes audience. Don't let the Missouri thing throw you off too much. We're not good at sports, so you don't really need to fear us that much, to be honest. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me, John.
Glad to have you. And Tim and I go way back. We were roommates in college, and he forced me to work for the school paper. Not forced, I guess. I did it. I had to.
Thing that I forced you to do. I also forced you to watch Lost and a bunch of other movies. So what we're doing today is talking about media. That's something we did a lot of. So. Yeah,
and Rachel and I will finish season 3 of Lost tonight.
Excellent. So, that's a really cool finale. So Rachel hasn't seen it before, right?
Yeah, this is her first time watching. So
it'll be interesting to see how she reacts to the big twist at the end if she doesn't already know about it. So.
No, she does not. There are some things that I have let slip, but this ending is not one of those things that I am going to.
That's good. That's like one of the all-time TV twists, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, I looked that episode up a couple nights ago. I didn't realize that was one of the most decorated TV episodes in television history.
Well, that was the height of Lost Mania, that big twist, and that's also season 3 is a lot of people's favorites, even though it has the Nikki and Paolo episode, which is unfortunate, and then I think it also has the Jack Tattoo episode, which is also unfortunate. But other than those 2 episodes, it's a killer season for sure.
Oh, definitely. And My wife, I still haven't convinced my wife that Ben's the best character on the show. So
that's a real shame. Ben is an amazing character.
Yes, he is. He is absolutely brilliant. But since we're talking about media, this is something I want to do on the podcast more often, is talk about media. And next week, we're going to have someone on to talk about the theology in The Chosen. But this week, I want to talk about the acting. And like I said, Tim has done film reviews in the past. In fact, he's produced his own film. We're not going to recommend it.
You had such an amazing star turn.
No, I should have introduced you as Don Luisi, actually. So, yeah, but I want to talk first about Christian media in general, all right? Because, you and I both kind of grew up in the bubble, although you had a lot more exposure to movies than I did, which is why I hadn't seen Shawshank Redemption until college. Mm-hmm. That's been remedied now. It's one of my favorite movies. Don't worry. Thanks to you. But I did grow up watching a lot of the Christian media of like the 90s and 2000s. Movies like The Climb, Extreme Days. And then, started getting the Sherwood Pictures movies like Courageous, Facing the Giants.
Fireproof. You can't forget all of those, like the wide series of apocalyptic Christian media that was also, we'll talk about that, I'm sure, but that was definitely a movement in Christian film as well.
Can I tell a secret that my audience doesn't know?
Yes.
I have never watched any of those. I have heard the radio drama, but I have never read the books, even though I actually have 2 of them here in my office. And I have, because they were given to me, I just haven't read them. And I have never watched any of the movies, but I have heard the radio dramas. And Caitlin Schliss, in her book, A Liturgy of Politics today, that I'm listening to right now, was talking about growing up on those and being terrified.
I think that was a pretty common experience if you grew up in a certain Christian family, and you had certain relatives who always thought the end was nigh, and then these books came out and they only reinforced those views you were hearing a lot of. So, and then you put it into a film format and it got even more scary for a brief moment. I mean, when you're a kid, everything's scary, but imagining the end of the world was definitely something that stuck back then. So.
And then we got Nick Cage versions and everybody laughed and laughed.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, because that's the thing, you can't have a Christian movie that's devoid of some kind of theology and practice. And
I think that may be part of the problem. I think the fact that it's always explicitly, it has to drop scripture. It has to have those themes. And I think that causes a lot of characters to be a little flat or a little bit, they're not always relatable to audiences that may come to it not already being of that mindset. And so what was your experience growing up with Christian media? Did you really enjoy what you were watching, or what did you think of it in general, John? Because we can start the conversation there.
So I actually really liked The Climb. I thought, just from a production standpoint, that movie itself was actually really good. There are some really hokey aspects to it, like when he's trying to figure out how to get the climb back on. He is reading his devotional, and he reads the only way to get to the Father is through the Son. So he's like, okay, I'll go to the son of this guy who's financing this and who pulled the plug on it. And but as a kid, I thought it was really good. Now I haven't watched it as an adult, so that may have changed now that I've seen some much better quality media. But even as an adult, so there's the God's Not Dead franchise, and I am going to go on the record here and saying that I cannot stand those movies. They were like the biggest thing coming out. I don't know. Did you see them?
I didn't see them, but isn't that where they basically had a PowerPoint and they were like trying to convince people that God's not dead? Or is that like, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. It was something where you're supposed to leave the theater and tell people God's not dead, right?
Yeah,
I know I got that text from my mom.
Something like that, yeah. Because the last scene of the movie is everybody texting out God's not dead, and then the newsboys come and do their big concert. Well, the atheist, played by Kevin Sorbo, is dying on the street after being hit by a car, and he makes his confession of faith right as the he's dying in the car accident. And funny story about that. So Jared Reimer and I went out after the wedding, after David's wedding, and we're going to go see a movie. And I think Kimmy was with us because they were dating at the time. It's before they were married. But went out to see a movie, and we had a choice. We could see God's Not Dead, or we could see Son of God. And we're like, well, we know God's Not Dead. It's not going to be all that good. So let's go to Son of God. And we left Son of God, which was the Roma Downing Jesus story from the Jesus Storybook Bible people, or Jesus, whatever it was, that Roma Downing produced. And we left that movie wishing we'd gone to see God's Not Dead.
And that's Christian film for you right there. If we could talk about some issues with Christian media, and on the surface, I don't have a problem with Christian media existing. I just hope it gets better. Like, I really do want it to be something that can appeal to more than the audience that it's already going to hit with. I think that's been a problem with Christian media for a long time. And specifically, there's production issues, and that's going to happen if you have a low budget. That's more understandable to me than what I think are some of the bigger problems with Christian media in general, is that historically, if you think about Christian media, one of the first things you're going to think about are all the depictions of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And that makes sense. Jesus is at the center of our faith. That's something that is understandable. What's not understandable is how often Jesus is white.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the first issues, is that when you think about Christian film, whether you're thinking about the depiction of Jesus as a brown-haired, blue-eyed person, or you're thinking about all these movies starring Kirk Cameron, Greg Kinnear, you're often seeing a white male protagonist, and that's the worldview you're getting. And that's been a problem with Hollywood films as well, but I just feel like the view is so limited with Christian media. You're getting the same families over and over again, and that's not speaking to an experience of a country that is so much more than that. And even beyond just being a white person, it's also a white male, and so often you're leaving female voices out of it too. And there's just so much more stories to tell. And I think these movies and television shows can be so much more dynamic if they get those views in there.
Yeah. And, every culture portrays Jesus in a certain way, but it's the West. In the West, we are the only ones who have deified that version of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And raised it to the standard that if you don't believe in this version of Jesus, well, I'm sorry, you're done. And I'm not a particular fan of the theology of the Shack, but one thing I do think they did well was bringing out the various characteristics, mother and father, of the triune God. Because God describes himself as a mother and as a father. So one of the things that they do well in the Shack is, as much as there's some theology in there that I might disagree with, is bring out those various characteristics that God even testifies to having himself.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when we are doing just our version of what we think Jesus is or looked like, we can miss on those aspects. I do remember thinking when we left the Son of God movie, well, now I guess the really flowery group, that's a terrible way to phrase it. The Jesus in that movie is so kind as he's to the point of being unbelievable. All right. So they go too far the other way. Jesus is either a stoic who uses an English accent, or he's just so kind that you can't believe that he's a real human being or God.
And I think that's really at the crux of the issue when it comes to portraying Jesus, is that it's hard when you're dealing with someone that's perfect. But I mean, that's the problem people have had with Superman too, right? Going into more mainstream film, it's hard when you're dealing with someone who literally doesn't have flaws. But there's more aspects to Jesus that could make him an interesting character if they wanted to go there. Like, this is the same person that flipped a bunch of tables in a temple. Like,
yeah. And fashioned a whip out of cords and cursed a fig tree. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, he's not just always, like you're saying, so nice all the time in the places he appears in the Bible, and certainly not when he shows up in Revelation. Like, that's not the it's not just always the nice flowery Jesus, like you're saying.
Yeah. And but to your point, in what Christian media has done is phenotype that, right? So the male lead in any movie is either this awesome culture warrior who won't take no for an answer, which was God's Not Dead, or is just so nice and kind, which is the Eugene Faulkner version of Saint Francis, where he's just like, oh, life is so great, so nice. And I got to be careful. You can't see it, but there's a Francis statue behind me here that. But anyway, so we take those phenotypes that we give to Jesus, and we put those into our hero stories, like or we take a hero from our culture. This is the other thing. Kristen DeMay just put out a book called Jesus and John Wayne, and the thesis is that we've taken that John Wayne as a cultural icon was used to say, this is what Jesus is. This tough masculine guy who's actually a really terrible human being. John Wayne was, despite what you might think about his films. But as a human being, he was not that great a person. I think he was married twice, divorced twice, something like that. And had kids by multiple women. And, there's a reason minorities are portrayed the way they are in his films. Like he had full control over all of that. And, DeMay's point is that we took him and made him what a Christian should be, what Jesus was. Or we take Ronald Reagan and we make, who was also, I think, thrice married, was not a devout believer. And he's what a Christian is. He's a stereotypical Christian, and you have to be like him. And I mean, but we do that in media, right? So,
and it just, people can't see themselves in the movies that they're watching. And so if you're not part of that group growing up, and you and I were, so we could see ourselves, but just knowing that there are so many people that wouldn't see themselves in these films, why should they buy in and care about what they're seeing?
Right. But at the same time, I have nothing in common with the main character of God's Not Dead. Like, yeah, I grew up in the evangelical bubble, but at Sterling, I never had a professor go, well, let's just dispense with the idea of God. God is dead. Nietzsche was right. God is dead. That never happened.
Right.
And so I can't identify with that. I can't identify with the Sterling student who after 4 years of Sterling became an atheist because of the way Christians acted on campus and treated her on campus. And we're not going to portray that because that's a failure on our part. as Christians. But that would be more relatable. Like someone going through deconstruction from evangelicalism would be more relatable to me than the main character of God's Not Dead, or even Son of God. Like I can't relate to the Jesus in that movie. He doesn't experience life, the life that I am living now, which is the whole point of Jesus, is that he comes and lives our life but he does it perfectly. And yeah, that's really hard to portray, like you were talking about. Although I would argue that Smallville Superman was far from perfect. But
right, he wasn't Superman yet.
That's true. That's true. He was the blue green blur, or whatever it was, blue and red blur, or whatever.
But no, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
But no, like I was saying, there's more relatable to the kid asking questions in church and getting told to go answer them yourself instead of getting answers than the kid who's like, I'm going to stand up to Kevin Sorbo because he's an evil atheist.
Yeah. And I think that goes to another flaw in Christian media, is that if you're not Jesus, there's still going to be all these characters that are so holy and so perfect. And maybe the central character has some crisis of faith, but there's so many people that don't have flaws. And that can't work because there's no drama in that. If you really are that perfect, where's the drama? Like, they have the perfect supporting wives that never question husband decisions. And they have, like, just the children are often not dynamic. And where are you getting your drama from in that?
Yeah, well, and so this all sets me up to talk about not just The Chosen, which we'll talk about in a second, but so not last Friday, 2 Fridays ago now, I put out an album review. It's the first time I've reviewed an album since I left Alt Rock Live. Probably since Demon Hunter's Outlive album came out. But I reviewed it precisely because it hits on a lot of what we're talking about here. Like and one of the big critiques, right, about Christian media and Christian music is that it just is not relevant. That's kind of what we've been talking about. It has no relevance to the culture. You can't identify with it. Like the praise and worship you hear on Christian radio is like attributed is said to have more in common with sugar than it does actually helping you maintain a faithful walk with Christ through Scripture. And that's Matt Braunthway, who was the founding member of Jars of Clay, making that critique. So but one of the things that happened at the beginning of 2021, so not that long ago, was Five Iron Frenzy put out a new album, and this was the first album I've reviewed in a long time, called Until This Shakes Apart. And if you read the review or have heard the album, it is. How do I explain this? It is deconstructing all of the reasons that we give for why everything is falling apart for Christians, why Christians are looking at cultural exile, why we don't have any relevance, because we tend to blame everybody else. And what Five Iron does, in fact, someone on Twitter said, who needs a new Rage Against album? Five Iron Frenzy has done that for us. And this is what Tim has hit on. This album is the first time in a long time I've said this is relevant to what's going on. Mm-hmm. So many people have left the faith because of the way the church has acted, and media has been a big part of that.
Yeah, I think if you're only seeing these perfect people and you don't measure up to what you're seeing, then why are you going to seek these out? These aren't going to make you feel good. And also they're boring. So you've got a double-edged sword as to why you're not really why people like me who loves media just doesn't engage with this type of content that often anymore because of bad experiences with it all along the way. And one final thing that I think is a theme in Christian media too is that there's no humor. And if you look at what is translating now, like think of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you've got to be funny. Yeah. Where these things don't have jokes, like ever.
Yeah, well, Five Iron has some jokes in this album, but they're very prescient. One song is called "Homelessly Devoted to You," and in Denver, you can imagine that is literal with how expensive everything is. You were not with me in Denver the summer I was there. You've been to Denver because
I've been to Denver several times. Yeah,
you've been to
Broncos. Let's get that on
the go. I'm just going to say go Packers, but I'm going to leave it at that because I'm still mad about last Sunday. But not last Sunday. It's Monday. I don't know. We're in a pandemic. Nobody knows what time it is.
We're all in a loop. So.
The snap has happened. But anyway, no, that happened to Ben Roethlisberger. Sorry. I'm sorry. That was for those who don't know, that was the first game of the AFC playoffs. First snap, the center snapped it right over Roethlisberger's head, and the Browns scored.
It didn't get much better from there.
No, it did not. But anyway, so in Denver, I worked with the homeless population in Denver for a summer when we were rooming together, and I went to the church that the guys from Five Iron started, which is called Scum of the Earth, and it was shockingly conservative in its theology. But it was very much fringe in the people that were there. The service was on a Saturday night. The congregation is either homeless or almost homeless or coming off the streets. They do a lot of work with the local food banks and community development. And they're successful for the reasons that Five Iron talks about in this album. They're not playing the culture war game. They're not sitting in irrelevance, right? Like we've been talking about. They are actually presenting something that is real, but it's real because it's from the margins. And a lot of Christian media is mainstream, so it doesn't come from the margins, right? So, which brings me to The Chosen. Okay. The Chosen, which you've seen because you got the app. If you want to get the app, I will just put this up front. If you're listening and you want to get the app, go to your app store. You can download it. All the episodes are free. The only thing they ask is that you pay it forward if you really like the episode. So you have the option to do that before or after the episode. And the reason you pay it forward is that so they can pay the actors and the crew and produce season 2, which season 2 is in production right now and hopefully will be here by April. But so it's all crowdsourced for one. So Tim, first of all, talk a little bit about how unique this is for movies in general.
Yeah. As far as crowdsourcing, that's something that's becoming a little more common with certain projects that may have seemed dead, or it's a way for fans to really get involved and express interest in something. And it's a way for people that have ideas that don't fit in traditional structures like studio systems to really get involved and get these ideas out there, which is really cool. That's why you have all these unique voices popping up on YouTube. That's why you're starting to see some things like this. It's not that common yet, but I think it's definitely an avenue for artists going forward, which is really cool. And it's something that hopefully continues.
Yeah. But within Christian mainstream, right? If you're not a Sherwood Pictures or you're not what I think it's Sovereignty Films who did the the October Baby movie or whatever it was, whoever that group was. You don't have the capital to just go out and produce a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And what The Chosen has done is find a way to create capital. But the people who are funding this, if you hang out in the Facebook group at all, which I don't usually, right? I should be quiet. I'm going to share this here. But if you hang out in the Facebook group at all, you know that a lot of the people who are commenting and posting are not the mainstream of Christianity. They're the fringe. They're the people who feel forgotten and suddenly have found something where they can identify with Jesus and identify with the story. And I know you only watched episode 1, but we'll talk a little bit about all this. And I think that's made a huge difference. It's coming from the fringe. It's not coming from the mainstream. And Dallas Jenkins, who, by the way, going back to our earlier discussion, is the son of Jerry B. Jenkins, who wrote the Left Behind books. Has gone to the fringes himself. He's gone through the deconstruction process and is consulting people that I think his father would have at one point looked down on him for consulting, like a Jewish rabbi, Catholic priest, a Protestant. He's got, and you can watch all the roundtables we're on the app, and we'll talk with Father Tyler next week about this, but he's doing something really different. So Tim, give us your thoughts just from watching episode 1.
Sure.
Take as long as you need.
Yeah. So The Chosen, I fired up the app and turned on the episode, and I was excited by the potential of where it started, because how it started was with a female character, right? And that's something that I was just criticizing traditional media. Not only was a female character, but it was a female character who was not portrayed by a white actress. And so it hit two of the things I was just talking about. Additionally, it got a little more intriguing because it seemed like it was going to trying something that's really popular with television right now, which is a flashback format. Okay. So it seemed like it was going to be going with that Lost type of storytelling where it would flash back to important moments in somebody's life and then flash forward to a current moment that they were in. And I was really excited by that structure because I hadn't seen anything like that in Christian media before. It was something that I was hoping was going to continue throughout the episode. It didn't really go there as much as I thought it was going to. And the character, who turns out to be Mary Magdalene, right, ends up being not as central to the story as I thought it was. And that could just be because it's a pilot and intro, and so you're getting introduced to a bunch of characters. But I thought it was a little disappointing that throughout the episode she kind of got lost in this otherwise big narrative that was happening. I really did appreciate the authenticity. I thought that the production values of this were much higher than most Christian media in the past. That doesn't mean that it doesn't still suffer from some of the things that we've been talking about, which is that these characters aren't the most exciting people to hang out with right now. And they're not the most interesting. They're more interesting than past biblical depictions, and I give the show credit for that. But there's still not a lot of humor, and there's not a whole lot that sets them apart as relatable in and of themselves to me. But I still thought it was a more interesting approach than I'd seen in past depictions of biblical adaptations. So I'll give it credit for that. Again, technically, the show was much better than what I've seen before. I appreciated some of the camera work. I really loved the costumes. And I also liked the musical score for the most part, which is something that most Christian media just does not have.
That opening scene has drawn, that opening credit song has drawn a lot of criticism from the Christian mainstream. It's like, oh, she's singing in a provocative manner. Oh no, it's like, oh, come on.
What are they talking about?
I know,
right? Provocative. Come on.
I know. Yeah, jump in the water. Yep, that's provocative. But
what do you think? What do you think about the characters? Because you've had more of a history with them. You've gone through a couple of episodes with them. What is your takeaway with the show?
I have watched through the whole first season twice. So I definitely agree that this episode is probably 5 cuts above anything I've seen in Christian media currently, across the whole spectrum, because I still follow the music industry pretty closely. And seeing one of the things that stood out to me right away, right, is that Jonathan Rumi, the guy playing Jesus, who you saw for all of 2 minutes, because he only comes into the first episode for 2 minutes, in this show that's advertised as a myopic of Jesus's life and ministry, Jonathan Rumi is not playing a stoic Jesus, mm-hmm. but he's not playing a super happy, friendly Jesus. And he makes jokes. There's a scene in episode 2, I believe, where they're gathering for Shabbat, and Mary has prepared the Shabbat meal for the first time after Jesus heals her at the end of episode 1. Which I should probably say now and should have said at the beginning. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. You need to, but and he winks. Which, kind of like the opening credits song, caused a big stir in some of the mainstream media circles. Like, Jesus doesn't wink. Jesus didn't wink. He's not a human. But I really have appreciated how they portray the culture, because it's so hard for us as Westerners to understand what a communitarian culture looked like. Mm-hmm. There's a scene later in season 1 where they're about to leave, and of course Peter has his wife, who is a big part of the first season. Mary gets more. We get more. You get more of Mary as the season goes on. The show is definitely centered on Jesus, but the disciple cast is what it should be. Mm-hmm. It's not 12 guys who just look as stoic as Jesus. There were women that traveled with the 12 and were part of the inner circle. And Dallas has done a good job so far of bringing Mary Magdalene into it, of bringing Salome, the mother of James and John, into the story, of bringing Peter's wife, who is only mentioned in scripture as they're at Peter's mother-in-law's house. And then we think there's a reference to him at the end of Peter's letters. She who is at Babylon greets you. But they do a good job, in my opinion, of showing what the culture is like. Now, the problem that the fishermen have is completely invented. But as you get into that, you start to feel like, oh, I could feel like as a pastor who has to pay their own taxes, I can feel that way. Oh, tax season's coming. Oh no. Yeah. And they do a good job of portraying what the Romans were like, and how the attitude, like we read the calling of Levi in the Capernaum Square, right? And we're like, oh yeah, Jesus just called him out and he followed Jesus. But when they get to that point at the very end, the very end of the series of the season, it causes dissension with Peter and the other disciples. Like, there's a reaction. Like, he's calling this terrible tax collector. Oh my gosh, this guy has been stealing from us and was going to take our boat and our our houses and the family, and we were going to be thrown in Roman prisons because of this guy. And Jesus just called him. Like, do you, and Peter actually goes to Jesus and says, don't you know what this guy has done? Don't you know? And Jesus is like, get used to different, Peter. Like there's a sense with this Jesus that he's not that he is closer to the Jesus that lived and walked on earth. And the people who are around him, I feel like, are a lot closer to the people that lived and walked on earth around him. And that for me is really significant. Obviously there are some, and Dallas acknowledges this, it's in English. They're not speaking Aramaic. But the rabbis aren't speaking Hebrew. Mm-hmm. But the cast is using likely period appropriate accents, because they're all from that region of the world, or related to people from that region of the world. Mm-hmm. Except for maybe Eric Avari. I don't know where he's from, but he plays roles like Nicodemus incredibly. Speaking of which, the fact that they got Eric Avari.
It's nice to see someone outside of the Christian casting circle. It's nice to see that they have someone who's actually had some Hollywood experience. It's good.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sitting there the first time we watched it, and I'm like, I know this guy. Oh my gosh, he's the translator from NCIS. Like, I have seen him somewhere other than Christian media. It's amazing.
I think it's an interesting choice to not have Jesus show up until the very end of the episode. And I don't know how it worked for someone like me who's skeptical of Christian media, because if I had seen a Jesus character that was a little different earlier, I might have been more inclined to be like, oh, okay, second episode, let's go. Rather than having him only show up at the very end and trying to use him as almost like the cliffhanger, which you see in most Netflix type of shows now. But the cliffhanger to me felt anticlimactic, because I'm like, oh, here's Jesus being perfect, saving Mary, mm-hmm. being stoic in this moment. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and Dallas acknowledged that was a weakness of the first episode. That if he had gone back to do it, the logic was they had so much that they wanted to do in that episode. They wanted to establish the Capernaum characters as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think they did a good job of that. But yeah, I agree that they should have the Jesus just popping in at the end. But I did appreciate the fact, and this is something that goes back to that earlier criticism of Christian media. I did really appreciate the fact that they didn't do a huge exorcism scene.
Yeah.
like most Christian media is like, exorcism scene. Yeah, get out all the special effects. We have a computer that we can make noises with. Let's use it. And they're like, and nope, that just a touch. Mary breathes and the demon's gone. That's the whole thing.
Disappointing poor Frank Peretti, instantly.
I know he's somewhere not watching The Chosen. Oh boy, we could have a whole podcast on Frank Peretti, you and I. Of course, I have several of his books over here. Yeah, I appreciated some of these aspects that weren't for the same reasons you did, and then for other reasons. Again, it's just so nice to be able to identify with Peter. Mm-hmm. I know what you're going through, buddy. Like the anxiety of what am I going to do now? That was kind of my first 2 years out of college was, I don't no clue what I'm going to do.
I think the question has to be, how far can you take a biblical adaptation? How much should that be the focus of Christian media, or should there be more of a trying to branch out and do something different? Because I think even though you can do these different things and you can show these characters in a more relatable light, I just don't know how much room there is to appeal to people that aren't already in a Christian circle to get them on board for that. I don't know. Like right now, the cultural currency is superheroes, sci-fi. Like, is there any room to do that with a Christian story? How would that work? You know, otherwise you're kind of boxed into these biblical stories that are important, but there's only so many places you can go with them, right?
We did that with Bible Man. Just so it didn't work.
You got to do it better.
Yes.
And I guess the other question is, do these properties have to explicitly reference scripture or not? Because I feel like that's where so many Christian things in the past have gone wrong, even ones that aren't set in biblical times, centered around specific verses and make it such a big part of the narrative. And I just don't know.
So, but this is one of the things I appreciate, and I know a lot of people have appreciated about the Chosen. Jonathan Rumi has done a good job of playing him in such a way where you get the sense that he is definitely divine.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's definitely the God man, the incarnate, but he is also definitely the man. And that's almost refreshing to a lot of people. So one of the reactions that I keep seeing from people of the Chosen is like that critique. Well, Jesus wouldn't have done that. And that what that's actually done, I think, is opened up the door for conversations where you can say, well, maybe he did. And for the unbeliever. So one of the things that's pervasive throughout the whole thing is, yes, these guys Jesus is calling are Jews, but they are so flawed. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end of the season, he's eating with Matthew and his tax collecting friends. Like, so this is one thing that doesn't get portrayed in biopics of Jesus, like ever, is him hanging out with the sinners. And I think that's one of the big draws if you keep watching. And by the way, that flashback thing comes back. They do it throughout the series because they use it to set up different events, like the woman at the well. They go back to when Jacob's well was dug in Genesis, or trying to think of another situation. The Wedding of Cana episode. They do a flashback to when Jesus is a boy and gets lost in Jerusalem, the temple story in Luke. So they use that flashback format really well to set up other things within the show. But I think one of the things that, again, is done so well is that in almost every single other form of Christian media, there is like the decision moment, and it's always filled with dramatic music and oh my word, something big is about to happen and it's going to be great. And then in The Chosen, they're just sitting over dinner at the Wedding of Cana talking, and Peter's like, well, John's like, well, what do we do? And Peter says, well, we watch him. And that's it. It's not this huge, like, fanciful hero moment. They're just sitting at dinner talking, and like I will do with my wife and daughter tonight, although she'll probably talk about Cocomelon, but you know. and that has been really relatable for a lot of people. And the non-believers that I've heard who are part of the focus groups that watch these have come away getting a sense of, okay, I can believe in that Jesus. I can't believe in the Jesus that the culture gives me, but I can believe in that Jesus. Especially, and then Dallas is able to say, well, we're trying to get him as close to the biblical account as we possibly can in the way he's portrayed. Now, a lot of the stories surrounding it, the events, they make them up because we just don't have the historical data, right? We don't know exactly what Jesus was doing when, or exactly what the conditions were at the Wedding of Cana. We just know Jesus and his mother were there. So everything else is up to the imagination, and who knows? the amount of prayer going into this project, maybe they're getting closer than they could imagine. But again, who knows? The point is that this Jesus actually feels relatable, and the people around him feel relatable, and they're showing him in situations that will make the average American Christian really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think has also been attractive to the non-believers in the room. And as much as I think there is space for where you don't have to be dropping a Bible verse every other line. Wink, wink. God's not dead. That one was directed at you. What makes this so unique to me is that even the scripture that's in there feels natural, like it's supposed to be. It doesn't feel forced. Like I could imagine coming across Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, and just hearing him teaching some of these things, of the kingdom of heaven. I can picture the miraculous catch of fish, which is someone who loves the behind the scenes stuff. I recommend you go watch the Miracle of the Fish story on the app, because that scene almost didn't happen. It's really incredible how it all came together, and it works. Like, I feel like they actually caught a bunch of fish. They're not just hauling up this animated mess. So yeah, I think that has the potential to be really impactful for people.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where they take it, I guess. And how far they're willing to go. Like, do you think they're going to carry it all the way to the cross and the resurrection, or where do you think it will stop?
So right now, the plan is 8 seasons, and they are going to end with the crucifixion, as far as I know, and resurrection. There is a big push right now amongst the fans to add a 9th season and kind of do the early church. Some of the things in the beginning of Acts, up to Paul. But the plan is, and they've got written for outlines for 8 seasons, so they know where they're going to go, which I think is a strength of the project.
It's always good when you have a plan and know where you're going. Otherwise, you can have a bunch of filler and you have no clear direction for a long time. So right. That's good.
Well, and it's like those last, and this is the advantage to crowdsourcing, but with Lost, you had those last 3 seasons where they're just like, we're going to re-sign you for 3 seasons. Have fun. And how crazy it gets because of that. But with crowdsourcing, you can pick and choose where you go. And I think that's a big benefit to the project. I also am amazed that they raised $10,750,000 in a pandemic year.
Yeah.
I'm like,
people got to have content to watch. So
that is a good point. How many Netflix shows have you finished?
Not even just Netflix, and it's just like a new streaming service every day at this point. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like I've watched a new movie at least once every 2 days.
Are you still reviewing?
Not as much as I should be. It gets hard when you're a doctoral student and you're doing all this academic writing, and especially because my stuff is based around Disney movies. So it's like, I don't know. I can write for fun, or I can write for my academic career. And right now it's the academic career that's winning out. But
that's kind of how I felt in seminary. That's why I didn't do a lot of album reviews. That's why
I try to do like little 2-sentence reviews on Letterboxd about anything I watch, and that's about as far as I go right now. Just so I'm keeping track of thoughts, and then maybe I'll get back to it eventually if I really want to flesh it out.
So what's out there right now in with Disney and some other things. We just got Disney Plus, so if you have any recommendations, Winnie the Pooh has played a lot here because I have a 2-year-old. But
well, as a pastor and as someone who's interested in everything supernatural, you really do need to watch Soul if you haven't done so already.
Okay.
Because they talk about an afterlife, obviously not the Christian afterlife. And I think that's something that's interesting too, is just how relevant spirituality is right now in the mainstream, even if it's not what we're talking about. You think about things like Soul or The Good Place, or God Friended Me. It's everywhere right now.
I want to watch God Friended Me. I really do. I
haven't seen it, but I can't recommend The Good Place any higher as far as shows go. It's one of the absolute best shows I've ever seen. Even if it's not obviously aligning with the Bible, it's still a great cast and just a lot of really great ideas in it. So that would be another recommendation. As far as Disney goes, though, definitely Soul. And WandaVision is crazy. So.
Oh, gosh, I want to watch WandaVision. See, this is the problem, right? So we're watching Lost. We got 5 seasons into Boy Meets World and still have to finish it. And
have you seen Mandalorian yet, John?
No, I have not.
You have to watch Mandalorian.
I have been into the multiplication of Star Trek shows really hard, and so I am going to. It is definitely on my list. Most of it's been spoiled by now, unfortunately, but it's very
one of those things that it doesn't even matter if it's spoiled, because the journey there is so good and the characters are so good.
See, what one of the things we've been doing for mental health is when it's warmer, it's harder to do this right now when it's going to be 5 degrees on Friday. Woohoo! Is Rachel's been going to a park, and I'll hang out with Aaron, and then I'll go. I have a hangout spot down in the basement with a second TV, PS3. There's a Kindle Fire down there now. We've got a second one for a new one, an updated one for upstairs. So I am planning, when we start that again, to just watch The Mandalorian. And then Picard season 2 will come out, but I am planning to watch it. It is on the list of things to watch. So, yeah.
One of the things we did for mental health is we put in a relatively cheap home theater system, just because movie going is such a big part of my life, and I haven't been able to do it for a year.
I know.
Gone to a theater.
I was listening to, I'm a subscriber for The Bulwark, which is like the center-right conservative response to the crazification of right-wing media. Mm-hmm. And they have a podcast by Sonny Bunch, who's a film guy, a lot like yourself, that's part of the subscription package. Like, you have to be one of the $10 a month people to get it. And he was talking about that. He was like, I miss theaters. I want to get back into theaters. And I'm like, what was the last movie I saw in a theater?
The last movie I saw in a theater was... been so long, but I think it was The Invisible Man, and it's like, that's not what I want the last ever movie to be that I see in a theater. So people need to get on it. So.
I think the last movie we saw in theater was the latest Spider-Man, actually. Far From Home. Oh, it was so good. So, of course, we have to drive 30 minutes to an hour to get to a theater now.
You really have to make the decision of whether it's worthwhile or not. So it's basically Marvel Cinematic Universe or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I mean, so that is quality. Like, I want something within Christianity like that.
Well, that's got to be the goal, right? And so I think that's when you have to make that decision of whether you want it to be with the actual character Jesus or not. And I think media has proven over and over again, you can have symbols that are Christ-like without having it be specifically set in that time and place, and it can work out. I mean, I would be ashamed to not have Lord of the Rings dropped in this podcast somewhere. So,
we almost went with that.
if we're talking about Christ-like figures that can still appeal to a wide range of people, just look at Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, well, and so one of the critiques that I've heard from people is that the secular world produces this incredible art. The quality, thinking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Lord of the Rings, Rachel and I just finished rewatching the Harry Potter movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like the quality is so high. Like it is a work of art to watch these things. And you sit there and go, man, that was incredible. Like as someone who was a big fan of the original Star Trek and has seen how hokey special effects were back in the day. Like we have come so far, and I know some of that is money, but like the secular standard is so far above what the church is doing right now, and that is really unfortunate.
Part of it's money, but part of it too is attracting those visionaries, and you're never going to do that if you're stuck in the same old. Like, think about even just the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the directors who are doing those movies. You're talking Ryan Coogler, who is an amazing Black director. He's not going to be interested in making a movie about a middle-aged man whose daughter dies and goes to heaven. That's not going to appeal to him. Taika Waititi is a New Zealander. He made Thor Ragnarok. He's not going to be like into some of the things that we've been talking about. So it's about attracting and inspiring those visionaries too, in addition to getting that money.
Well, and inspiring them in-house. So, one of my struggles as a musician when I was playing a lot more than I am now was the idea that the type of music I was doing was not church appropriate. And especially in seminary when we were doing the opened eyes, and we had our guitarist was like metalizing some of the songs that I'd written, and we were just having fun. Our drummer was amazing, and some of that it strikes me that some of that is just the reaction to the church has been, well, we don't want that here. I mean, and so what happens is, on a sociological level, is all the creatives just flee the church. Like if you are a creative, you have a better chance of doing music on a secular label and being successful than you do going to Sparrow or Sony's Christian music division, Sovereignty. And that has just destroyed the music industry. Cause you have guys like Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors who are very obviously believers, and they're making, they are selling out in secular markets. But the Christian music industry was like, well, we don't want that. We don't want you and your style. It's not worship. It's not Chris Tomlin. And no offense to Chris Tomlin, but the model that we've decided to use has run out the creatives. And the way the industry works, if you're not a pastor or the son of a pastor or the son of one of the big names in music, you're not going to get in. You're locked out. And even someone like me, who's a pastor, and the publishing world is a bit like this as well. If you don't have an in, you're not going to get in. And that is a big problem. If the church wants to bring its creatives back and inspire its creative people to do the things that the Russo brothers have done, that, the guys you have mentioned have done. The what needs to happen is we need to say, okay, you have this artistic ability. You should use this space to do it. And we don't do that.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I'm not going to show your films to a room full of pastors. It's just, even the one I was in, I'm not.
You shouldn't show those movies to a room full of anybody.
Hey, if I recall correctly, we did.
Hey, we did it in a space used for worship services too.
Oh no! Yeah, where they also did Children of God and Picnic, and
that's right. It was shown in the chapel space. So.
Yep.
All those deaths, all those. Yeah, I don't know. It may not go over well with Christian audiences to have a montage of murders set to a Christian hymn like my movie did, huh?
Probably not. I mean, if you think about it, like the point is prescient, right? Like, you make fun of the people, you make fun of this guy for being short, and what do you expect to happen? Like, so
it's not just about. Well, I can't believe we're talking about my movie. But the point was to talk about people who have had failure in their life. And I really think that just having people that you can relate to really does matter. And approaching it in a way that is humorous, even if it's darkly humorous, like me or people who are so much more talented than me, like the Coen brothers. That's a way you can approach media. And it doesn't have to be this same vanilla recipe that's always trotted out.
And which is like contributed to box office failures. So that's an interesting point, right? Everyone talks about how much money God's Not Dead and shows like that made, but it's nothing compared to even where The Chosen is at. Or, I mean, what, James Cameron, how many times has he been trounced by the Marvel movies now?
Yeah.
Is he doing anything? Is he going to try and get that record back?
James Cameron, he's filming an Avatar sequel somewhere in an ocean. That's all we know. He's been working on that thing for years.
Oh, well, how long did he work on Titanic and then Avatar 1? So
there was a big gap between. I think there was probably a gap between Titanic and Avatar. So, but he's on pace.
Yeah. Well, by the time he does that, there will be 3 new Marvel movies. So, yeah. So anyway, Tim, thank you so much. This was a great discussion.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I know we want more. Just better. Make it better. And I think The Chosen, like we said, is a huge step in that direction. So go and check it out. Tim, I'd encourage you to watch the rest of the season because it does get better. And then we'll talk again, probably in private, because once I have Tyler on, we're going to move on from The Chosen. But next week, Father Tyler joins us. He is an Anglican minister from Washington, and a good friend of mine as well. So, Tim, thank you again for joining us. Glad you could be here, and we will all pray that we get some better Christian media in the future. Thanks, guys.